Right at this very moment, Gerasimov has stripped Putin's army to the bone. This happened behind the dictator's back. The army is on the brink of collapse. Near Zaporizhzhia, the Ukrainian armed forces are stoking a cauldron for the Russians. This is revenge for Pokrovsk, blackout in Moscow. Ukraine has opened a new front deep inside Russia. Putin is already preparing to make his exit. Urgent evacuation. The enemy's war machine has stalled. All this in our episode of Hellpoint. Urgently, Gerasimov has seriously set up Putin and robbed his own army. While soldiers are dying on the front lines and cities are burning, the Kremlin elite is counting their profits. You have to see this. Russian might is actually a fake. Unimaginable wealth was found in the general's pockets, all behind the dictator's back. The commander is hanging by a thread. Will it come to the point where the guilty are punished? Or will General Gerasimov continue to enrich himself against the bloody backdrop of war, showering Putin with flattering words? We'll find out in just a moment.
Corruption, luxury, and cronyism. These are the three pillars supporting the hybrid general, Chief of the General Staff, Valery Gerasimov. Compared to his former colleagues, his patron Sergei Shoigu and Shoigu's money man Timur Ivanov, the withered, silent Gerasimov looks as poor as a church mouse. But let that not fool anyone.
You sit here in these expensive clubs, surrounded by luxury and comfort, enjoying the atmosphere and the company of others who share your lifestyle. Meanwhile, your kids are out there, living it up, going to parties, meeting friends, and capturing their experiences on video. They film these moments for YouTube, sharing their lives online for everyone to see. You think that you have everything under control, that you know what is happening in their lives, and that you have provided them with everything they need. Gerasimov
is the author of the hybrid warfare formula that the Russians first tested in Donbass and then in Syria. And as of January 2023, he was appointed commander of the joint group of occupying forces in Ukraine. And he is hardly any different from other armchair generals who sacrifice thousands on the battlefield and make millions off the war. The only thing that sets Silent Gerasim apart is his extraordinary secrecy. He doesn't give interviews and tries to hide all information about his property. But even the scraps of information that journalists have found make it clear the military official lives far beyond his salary. The official income of the Gerasimov family is a secret. Journalists are working with figures from before the full-scale invasion.
Gerasimov's declaration is deliberately modest. The official income of Gerasimov's wife since 2009 is just under 31 million hryvnias. At the same time, the general received almost a third of this amount in 2018. On average, the chief of the general staff earns 2.9 million hryvnias per year, and his wife earns a bit more, 167,000 hryvnias. However, the value of his real estate is completely disproportionate to these amounts. Journalists have estimated that the family of the head of the Russian General Staff, Valery Gerasimov, owns property worth between 100 and 150 million hryvnias. How this was purchased on an annual income of 3 million hryvnias remains an open question. Was it a gift, or did the state provide it as a perk? It's unclear.
Despite his modest salary as a military official, he managed to purchase an apartment in an elite building not far from the GRU headquarters. At first, the apartment, worth about 50 million rubles, was registered in his wife's name, but later her name disappeared from the records. The couple also became co-founders of the Afinieva Developers Association in the village of the same name in the Rafamin district of the Moscow region.
Here, she acquired ownership of a cottage at 6 Nova Street with an area of 554 square meters and a cadastral value of 20 million hryvnias. And a few years later, he finished building a bathhouse of 236.3 square meters. Though it turns out it's not exactly traditional, with a real jacuzzi. Gerasimov also owns 2 land plots here with a total area of 4,313 square meters. The market value of all this real estate could reach 100 million rubles.
However, Valery Gerasimov hardly ever relaxes at the dacha. It's his son and daughter-in-law who spend time here. Thanks to her photos, we can get an idea of the interior decor of the military official's apartment. By the way, Gerasimov gave his son a separate apartment as a wedding gift, almost 200 square meters, worth over 30 million rubles. And in addition, 2 parking spaces as well.
Gerasimov is the quintessential Russian military commander of the Putin era. A murky biography, a lack of professionalism, and no sign of patriotism either. Just endless loyalty and devotion to Putin.
Valery Gerasimov didn't just provide his entire family with hundreds of square meters of real estate. He surrounded the entire Russian Ministry of Defense system with his relatives, including nephews and in-laws. And his son, Yevgeny Valerievich, an employee of the main Directorate for International and Military Cooperation, even managed to obtain the status of a combat veteran. Obviously, with all the corresponding payments and benefits, However, on which fronts Yevgeny Gerasimov actually fought is also a big secret. Just like the real list of his father's assets.
Urgently, the enemy has launched a new offensive from Zaporizhzhia. Putin is glaring like a wild beast toward Huliapol. The focus has shifted. Zelensky is urgently heading to the front. The armed forces of Ukraine are splitting the enemy's forces. Hellish battles have begun. The enemy is already on our hook. The screams of the occupiers can be heard from afar. It's the sound of their failure. Putin would be better off keeping quiet about this. What is happening there now, and at what cost every meter is gained? You'll find out in just a moment.
The troops of the Russian Federation have shifted their priorities and launched an offensive on other sections of the front.
As of today, Russian occupation forces have concentrated their main strike in the Zaporizhzhia region, aiming to encircle Huliapol from the eastern and northern sides.
In the Zaporizhzhia direction, Russian forces are increasing the pressure.
To achieve this, they recently crossed the Yanchul River, which allowed them to directly reach the settlements of Sladke, Ravnopole, and also Yablukove.
The occupiers are rapidly advancing towards Zaporizhzhia and bypassing the defensive line through the Dnipropetrovsk region. From
the north along the Yanchul River, Russian occupation forces are trying to increase pressure both on the Dnipropetrovsk region and towards Pokrovske, through the interfluve of the Volchya and Varanaya rivers, and along the Yanchul on both the right and left banks.
In the direction of Huliapol, the occupiers are trying to cut off Ukrainian logistical routes along two highways.
They are establishing a connection towards Pokrovsk, and this will secure their logistics, allowing them to push as many as 10 regional armies onto this bridgehead, increasing troop density, and then forming a strike towards Zaporizhzhia.
The Russian command is giving increasing priority to the Huliapol direction. Reinforcements are being transferred here from the Dobropilia direction, from near Pokrovsk. The situation near Huliapol is tense. This is also reported by the American Institute for the Study of War. Since the end of August 2025, Putin's army has managed to capture approximately 250 square kilometers of territory. Deep State shows that the front line runs less than 1 kilometer south of Huliapol and 6 kilometers northeast of the city.
Overall, the field with Apollos and the fields lead to the Tselina Balka, which is a landscape reserve located south of Rivnopilia. Essentially, there are only a few kilometers left to Huliapol, about 5 to 7 kilometers, depending on the direction.
The commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Ukraine, Oleksandr Syrsky, reported a significant deterioration of the situation in the Huliapol direction the day before.
The situation has significantly worsened in the Oleksandrivka and Huliapol directions, where the enemy, taking advantage of their numerical superiority in forces and equipment, advanced during fierce fighting and captured 3 settlements. The soldiers of the Southern Military Group are engaged in exhausting battles for Rivnopilia and Yablukove. Appropriate support measures are being taken. The aggressor has suffered significant losses from combined fire.
Russian military correspondents have also recently reported on the Russians' advance toward Huliapol. Units of the Vostok Group are advancing on the Ukrainian city.
You have to carefully watch your step, very carefully, because there are a lot of hidden mines. And constantly keep an eye on the sky, because their unmanned aerial vehicles, such as FPV drones, are everywhere.
This is the Russians' new operational concept. Gradual attrition of Ukrainian defenses using infiltration tactics. According to Ukrainian military sources, the enemy is suffering significant losses while attempting to advance. Huliapol is a very important settlement in the defense of Zaporizhzhia. This is also noted by war correspondents.
After Huliapol comes Orikhiv. And then, apart from Komishuvaka and Stepanohirsk, there will be little left to stop the enemy from approaching the southern outskirts of Zaporizhzhia. This will also affect the urban-type settlement of Pokrovsky. If the enemy captures it as well, they will be able to reach Vilnyansk.
The Russian army systematically carries out airstrikes on Pokrovsk in the Dnipropetrovsk region. The footage shows the consequences of Russia's terrorist acts. Destroyed cars, ruined houses. This is the center of the settlement.
In the current moment,
the Russians' plans are to strike at the rear to complicate supply lines, destroy logistics and drone operators, as well as to carry out targeted penetrations into the rear. After that, small assault groups conduct operations trying to advance quickly and force Ukrainian units to abandon their positions. But
This is such a deeply negative and troubling development of losses that it could very well become a precursor to the eventual formation of a bridgehead and the establishment of conditions for the Russian occupation forces, which in the future could even potentially allow them to organize an offensive operation toward the city of Zaporizhzhia.
President Volodymyr Zelensky made a working visit to the front in the Zaporizhzhia region. He listened to reports from the commanders.
Good health to you guys. Glory to Ukraine.
Good health. Glory. I have
The honor to be here today and to award the soldiers of the 65th Brigade. Thank you for what you do for defending Ukraine.
Despite the enemy's efforts, the fighting continues. The best assault units are battling for every centimeter of our land. The ground is melting under the Kremlin's feet. Every Ukrainian strike knocks Russia off balance and makes it gasp in helplessness. Ukraine is squeezing Putin in an iron vice. On the energy front, it's real thunder, and Russia's fattest targets are already in the sights of our defenders. The shadow of catastrophe looms over Moscow, and there are no escape routes. Darkness lies ahead. Ukrainian forces have hinted at what awaits the occupiers as soon as tomorrow. This is something you need to hear.
More and more Russian cities are plunging into darkness. If the Russians attack Ukraine's energy system, Ukraine will attack Russia's. The Ukrainian authorities warned about this, and the defense forces have demonstrated it clearly. The cover
Was removed.
This is what the Voronezh thermal power plant looks like now, for example. It was attacked on November 9th. Reports say there were at least 3 direct hits. After the explosions, part of the city was left without electricity.
Voronezh is quite a significant city, playing an important role in its region. Voronezh is home to a considerable number of enterprises, including various businesses and factories. These enterprises are a key part of the city, and that's exactly why Voronezh is recognized for its economic importance.
Where the difference lies between Russian and Ukrainian strikes on the energy system. In addition to a deserved response, the goal of the Ukrainian defenders is to plunge into darkness those energy infrastructure facilities that support the operation of Russia's defense industry.
This is dual-use equipment. First of all, it's really about showing Russia that they're not the only ones who can do this. We can respond in kind to certain things as well. And indeed, in order to truly attempt to stop their powerful and relentless machine and to undermine and weaken the vast military-industrial complex that is actively and continuously working against us in this ongoing war, we must be both vigilant and persistent.
That is, at first glance, it's like pecking away at the Russian energy system, gradually knocking out various elements of their infrastructure. So, at first glance, it might just seem satisfying that somewhere in Belgorod the lights went out, or in Voronezh. But let's think about it. In some ways, the overall configuration and structure of the Russian energy system might actually be quite similar to ours, particularly in the sense that the power supply or the electricity that is generated and distributed comes from some of the same sources as ours does. So,
all these attacks are not random. The goal is not just to respond, but to respond painfully, so that the facilities supplying power to the military-industrial complex of the aggressor country can no longer fuel the Kremlin's ambitions.
when certain crucial and vital elements of the overall integrity and stability of the Russian energy system are gradually and systematically taken out of operation, it primarily means that somewhere at some point a train carrying something absolutely essential and critical for the ongoing war effort will come to a halt and stop, or there will be rolling blackouts and power outages at a factory that is producing things and materials the Russians desperately need for the war, and
not all such enterprises are located deep in the rear, experts say. Many of these facilities are situated not far from the Ukrainian border. For example, the strategic bombers Tu-95 MS are repaired in Taganrog, and one of the manufacturers of components for the Russian missile program, specifically solid fuel for Iskanders, is located just 150 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. It is entirely possible to plunge them into electrical darkness. There are undoubtedly such important facilities for the Russian military-industrial complex in the Moscow region as well. And not just there, even in Moscow itself. I
think that the psychological effect of plunging Moscow into darkness would be much more effective than just hitting a few factories there. Because it's precisely this main mass, as they call it, the office plankton, who live off the regions. Finally, it will dawn on them that something is happening and that something needs to be done.
In this way, Ukraine will kill not 2, but 3 birds with 1 stone at once. A fair response is the paralysis of Russian military-industrial complex facilities and psychological pressure on the Kremlin. Sounds like the perfect target for the next blackout.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
Breaking news. Putin leaves Moscow and some interesting facts have surfaced about the dictator's real whereabouts. A triple deception. The Kremlin tried to hide it, but failed. The residences came under threat. Fierce drones reached them as well. Putin was genuinely frightened. It seems there is no safe place for the Kremlin's chief in Russia, and all the cunning schemes have been exposed. The first details. You need to hear this now. The secrets of Putin's offices. It turns out that the Russian dictator goes to great lengths to hide where he actually is and from where he runs the country.
For the past 10 years, we've constantly seen Putin in this very office. A bright, functional office of 120 square meters is located on the 2nd floor of the new representative building in Novo-Ogaryovo. Outside the window, there's 1.5 kilometers of forest. You can't just peek inside from the street. That's where Putin makes important calls, holds video conferences, and meets with people. And for almost the entire pandemic of 2020 to 2021, according to Kremlin reports, Putin worked exactly there. Or did he?
After reviewing dozens of hours of the program Moscow, Kremlin, Putin, the Kremlin website archives, government procurement documents, building plans, routes of movement for Putin and his entourage, as well as hotel bookings and business trips of state TV employees, journalists from the System project discovered that since 2015, exact replicas of the suburban office have been created for the dictator in order to conceal his actual location at any given moment.
The Kremlin uses these replicas to create the impression that Putin is working in the Moscow suburbs. In reality, most of the footage supposedly from the Moscow suburbs was filmed in decoy offices farther from Moscow.
At present, it is known that there are at least 3 completely identical offices in different parts of Russia. In the Moscow suburb of Novo-Ogaryovo, the Sochi residents of Bukhar-Fruchein and Navaldayan. Each of them replicates the original interior down to the smallest details. The color of the walls, the arrangement of the furniture, and the decorative elements, so that viewers cannot tell one room from another. The nested system of twin offices allowed the dictator to record addresses and hold meetings from different parts of the country, creating the illusion of stability and constant presence in the same office. Despite the apparent identicalness of the rooms, journalists discovered small but telling differences. The height of the door handles, the lines on the walls, and the arrangement of folders on the desk. It was these details that became the key to exposing the carefully concealed deception.
By drawing 2 lines, we can confidently say which room Putin is using. Here is the new Ogaryovo. And here is the copy office. And again, here is the original. And here is the copy.
Since February 2023, Putin has almost stopped using the Sochi office after he began to fear Ukrainian drone strikes. The Bukharov-Ruche residence, once convenient and secure, turned out to be vulnerable, and the dictator began looking for more hidden and protected places to work.
Despite the fact that several air defense positions have been set up there, it's still close enough to Ukraine, and the long-range capabilities of the Ukrainian drone forces allow them to stage
a lot of weddings there. That's why Valdai is farther away. It's better hidden, and the topography there is better. Well, it's in the forest, it's a residence in the woods. And in Sochi, it's a residence in the mountains, in a fairly open area. But it has a view, you know? That is, when you build yourself a residence with a view, so you can see both the mountains and the sea. It's not just that you can see the sea, but you can also be seen a bit from the sea. That's why Sochi dropped out of both of his favorite residences. Since
the beginning of 2025, the same fate befell the suburban office in Novo-Ogaryovo. Now, Putin's addresses and meetings are recorded in 2 different offices, one in the Kremlin and one at Lake Valdai in the Novgorod region. That's where another office was set up. Journalists claim that the Valdai residence has become the main home for Putin's secret family, officially established with the woman named Alina Kabayeva. There, the dictator could hold meetings in private and record addresses, passing them off as footage from the Moscow region residence.
It also has its own distinguishing features. The first is the switch. It is located exactly in the center of the panel, not like in the original Novo-Ogaryovo or in the copy in Sochi. The second is the seam on the wall, the one right behind Putin's head. It is located much higher than the panel joint. This office has its own writing set, its own distinctive pattern on the desk. And in general, we found more than 150 photos of this office. But that's just among those we were able to identify. Let's once again show how the three rooms differ from each other. In all three rooms, the seam on the wall behind Putin is at a different height. This is how the positions of the door handles differ. And this is how the thermostats are positioned in the different locations. And this is what the desk and the folder for papers look like.
Analysis of video materials and movement routes showed that, despite the appearance of working in Novo-Ogaryovo, Putin could actually have been in any of the three mentioned offices. Journalists have recorded how, in a single day, the Russian leader appears in an office with one type of renovation, then a few hours later in another, and then again in the previous one.
Since around 2018, there has been a process of absolute merging of the president's personal physical comfort, his actual body, with state necessity. In other words, the king's body ceases to be a human body and becomes a vast state hyperobject. Within it, clinics appear, secret residences, a second family, so to speak, emerges, not in parallel with the first wife, but as a separate development. And all of this no longer works in the sense of, let's at least pretend that the president follows the rules, performs the ceremonies, but rather, let's build everything in such a way that the president is simply comfortable.
And while the Kremlin creates an appearance of stability and power, in reality, the Russian dictator is afraid. He is afraid of Ukrainian attacks, afraid of losing power, afraid of any signs of instability. The Kremlin is coming apart at the seams. Factories that for years supplied the army with equipment now sit idle, dead weight. Tanks and armored vehicles are gathering dust, and the front risks being left without the most essential supplies. Putin's war machine is starting to stall. The economy is cracking, budgets are empty, and grand ambitions are crashing against cold reality. Everything the dictator has built is falling apart before our eyes. And this is only the prologue to the catastrophe. What will happen next, and how will it all end for Russia? Don't miss all the details coming up in just a moment.
We must not only keep up with the global economy, but constantly strive to outpace its dynamics thanks to our own potential.
But in Russia, there is no sign of any dynamics or potential. In particular, even the most resilient are starting to collapse. For example, the Russian military giant Uralvagonzavod, which produces armored vehicles and enjoys all the privileges of the military-industrial complex, can't withstand the pressure and is coming apart at the seams.
What is the plant management doing? They don't formally lay people off, but instead switch them to a 4-day work week with a 20% pay cut.
Or you might say,
a 3-day work week with a 40% pay cut. This is exactly the situation that's happening. But even this is no longer helping. And this stage has already happened. According to the latest statistics, about 250,000 people in Russia have been working like this recently.
But even reducing shifts to a minimum is no longer working. At the enterprise that is the flagship of Russian tank manufacturing, there will be layoffs. This was reported by the Russian publication E1. In some departments, up to 50% of the staff is planned to be laid off, but across the entire enterprise, every 10th employee will lose their job.
Previously, it was somehow the case that civilian production might not have been very profitable, but there was a lot of money in the military sector, and it somehow made up for it. But now it seems that even orders for military products are decreasing, and it appears that Rollwagon can no longer cover the losses in the civilian sector with its military income. That's why now, in the civilian production sector, they're going to lay people off, reportedly about 10%.
Experts explain that the reason for all this is the incredible collapse of the Russian economy. Ukrainian strikes on oil refineries, which are depriving the Russian Federation of millions in petrodollars, Western sanctions, and increased pressure from the US on Russia's oil sector have already led to a situation where even the negative forecasts for the economy are inaccurate. Things will get even worse.
Negative forecast from the central bank is probably a GDP decline of 2.5 to 3.5%, inflation at 12%, and an interest rate of 20%. In other words, they will have to raise the rate back to 20% next year. And this is their negative scenario, which I don't even consider negative. This is just the current reality. That's the point. The thing is, the accumulated problems just keep surfacing every day. And they prevent the central bank from maintaining the scenario it considers manageable.
The situation has escalated to the point where the decline of the Russian economy is now being publicly acknowledged.
The question is, Is this enough? Is this what we wanted?
In fact, even according to official data, a recession has already occurred in 19 out of 24 sectors of the Russian economy. Moreover, they are now even starting to have problems with defense, with their military-industrial enterprises. These enterprises are already experiencing non-payments. They are not being paid from the budget, and work weeks are being reduced, as is the case with Uralvagonzavod, for example. This means their funding was cut about 3 months ago. So these processes are actually happening.
At the same time, the most interesting thing is that in the Russian Federation, they've already come up with a way to present this information to the higher-ups. It's all modeled after things like negative growth and unsuccessful successes. So now, they are openly talking about the economic decline. At the same time, they add that previously there was such unprecedented growth that it simply couldn't last forever. So now we're seeing a decline. That's
their strategy. To say that there is no recession, no economic decline, and then release a story that maybe in the fourth quarter there will be an economic downturn, and to cover all of this with a bunch of disclaimers.
The solution suggested itself to once again revise the budget draft. Of course, in the direction of negative growth.
We are currently holding a comprehensive and extensive series of important meetings regarding the main and most significant financial document of the country, which is considered its primary and top priority.
And the priority, as before, remains the war, so they advise not to expect any improvement in analytics. And if the cuts have already affected the industrial giants of the defense industry, all enterprises in the country are next in line, including private ones. That's all from me for now. This was Darina Hatsakalo with you. Even more hellish news in our next episode. And in the meantime, don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. See you!